Hello, everyone. My name is Unmesh from very quiet San Francisco. Welcome, everyone. And as everybody's gathering and seeing tremendous interest in this topic today, we will be starting this webinar very shortly, and I'll be introducing our guest in a few minutes altogether. So to get started, I hope all of you are really doing very well actually in this very unique time that we are in the global crisis altogether. As we obviously are going through this major storm, this is a very timely topic for all of us essentially. It is really what has brought to us is essentially is the collaboration of and failure essentially of the health crisis that could have been prevented to some extent, and it can be done better next time around altogether. So today in this topic, I think I would like to really kick off this session by essentially first give you a bit of a perspective about who our guest is, which is Ben Carpenter, who is a CEO of Social Value International. This is going to be a very conversational webinar. In fact, I want everybody to be participating in this unique opportunity today. So to begin with, I'm going to be starting out by giving you a very quick question to all of you. But before you do that, a few housekeeping items. First of all, as I said, let's keep it more conversational. There are two windows, two icons on your Zoom. And by the way, we are in a global crisis. Everybody's getting to know about Zoom. So hopefully Zoom is not unknown to anyone in this particular call today. So with that, there's two icons that I would like to encourage people to use it. One is a chat window, and there are lots of people today in the call. So I'll pause the question to just get the juice going and make sure that you are interactively answering that thing. We'll be getting back to that particular question at the end of the call. And the first of the question is really, what are we learning from COVID-19 crisis? And Ben Carpenter will also give his perspective at the end of the presentation as well. And the second question is, how can we use this as an opportunity to achieve the SDG? So I hope you have noted this question, and please, and this question is in the chat window, so you can see that, and please feel free to share your perspective in the chat. At the same time, I would also like to encourage you to also spend a little bit time to ask the questions to the panelists here, which is really Ben and Unmesh, which is myself, and really we will be happy to share this perspective. The flow of this presentation is really very unique. We'll be starting out by essentially really putting in perspective what exactly is the Sdg Washing is. And once we have identified that thing, how does that impact management align with the Sdg Washing? And that will also bring you very challenging topic that many of us are struggling, right? Many of them who are coming from impact investment background, some of them are coming from philanthropy background, corporate background, or they're running a small, medium-sized business or social enterprise. So how do you really align yourself in a very intentional way with the Sustainable Development Goals? How do you align with Sustainable Development Goals, targets, and indicators, and other indicators? So this is a very timely topic, and we hope that this really is helpful to really start out the whole the journey for all of us in a new coming world altogether. So that said, I'm just gonna start out by a very quick word of that many of you may have heard of this thing, and I just can't help to share this thing with you. So as you know, a lot has changed in the last few weeks. An unknown author said correctly, we fell asleep in one world and woke up in another. Suddenly the Disney is out of magic. Paris is no longer romantic. New York doesn't stand up anymore. The world continues its life and it's beautiful. I think it's sending us a message. You are not necessary. The air, the earth, the water, and sky without you are fine. When you come back, remember that you are my guest, not my masters. So, with that, I would like to kick off this particular call, essentially. And as part of the kickoff, I will be starting with a very short video. As many of you may have really seen that SOPAC has recently started a webinar series, which is not a webinar series, but a video series. We have very positive feedback, but fundamentally, this particular video is very timely because it's talking about Sdg washing. I'll just spend not more than 45 seconds essentially. So let's hang in there and let's listen to this one. And Ben will go into more detail about this particular topic. So what is Sdg washing? So let's start out.
Today's topic. What is SDG washing? There are two ways to define it. One situation occurs when companies are making a profit by doing well on one SDG, but are concurrently doing harm on other SDGs. The other involves businesses who talk about their commitment to SDGs, yet don't have any data to back the impact reports. In other words, they're all bark and no bite. I know that as a socially conscious company, the last thing we want to do is to fall into this SDG washing category. So here are some tips to avoid falling into the trap. Number one, align your indicators to SDG targets and not just SDG goals. Everyone knows that there are 17 global goals, but did you know that the UN has also defined 169 SDG targets that give us a clear guideline on the impact and context for each goal? For example, goal.
Okay, so with that in mind, that's the introduction. I would like to introduce you to our main guest, Ben Carpenter. Many of you may already know him. He's a CEO of Social Value International. Social Value International is one of the pioneers in driving the social value movement throughout the world. With 45 member organizations throughout the world, Ben is leading the quiet movement of really aligning social value and impact management based approach, which is many of the people are really now finally waking up and say, how can I really align myself with the stakeholders that we need to serve most? It is very important. It's a stakeholder driven approach. And I would like to invite Ben to remind there are 7 principles and how that needs to be obviously aligned towards Sdg washing. But, and by the way, Ben, you can also talk about some of the activities that you do, but let's start out by the first topic, which is what is the Sdg washing? So Ben, all yours, and thank you so much and welcome again to the webinar.
Thank you, Ramesh. It's an honor to be invited, so thank you. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you for joining. Are we diving straight in then with the first question, that what is SDGs? Is that where we should begin on that?
Yeah, what is SDG and Sdg washing? Well,
I think that video was really good, actually. I really enjoyed it. I think you unpicked it. I just want to start off by saying I'm actually a fan of the SDGs. I think they're a fantastic shared agenda for everyone around the world, whether you work in government, business, non-profit, to recognize what we're working towards. We're collaborating towards a more sustainable future for everyone. So I like them. I'm a fan. Just want to get that out there. The SDG washing is what the video said, a risk, because what I'm concerned about is big businesses or organizations talking very much about SDGs and how they are trying to achieve them without much credibility behind that. So some of the risks I see is like greenwashing, where organizations are telling the world how great they are in terms of improving the environment or achieving one or two of the particular SDGs that they are focusing on. But perhaps they are just doing just that. They are choosing and cherry picking which things to talk about, which areas of success they want to talk about, and they're also choosing not to be accountable or report on all of the negative or harmful consequences of their actions. As the video said, maybe they are performing well in one SDG, but actually causing a lot of harm towards another one. So really, the SDG washing is just a kind of reminder to everybody that reporting can be skewing sort of the reality. And right now, when it comes to a lot of impact reporting, there isn't the same level of scrutiny that there is on financial reporting and accounting. And so what you get is a lack of accountability, and reports really just being there to sort of be about a marketing document as much as anything else, and not really being used to inform any decisions about performance towards the overall SDGs. So I'll stop there because that's perhaps me getting on my soapbox. But I think, yeah, I just think that there's a real risk at the moment when people talk about SDGs, and we need to call people out on that.
Okay, so with that introduction to everyone, maybe we can really get into the next topic, which is really why is it essential to avoid SDG washing? And maybe Ben, you can give a little bit more perspective from various different key players' perspective. As you know, Sustainable Development Goal is not just for the philanthropy. And this was one of the big correction, obviously, done from MDG to SDG. One of the key aspect of SDG is to bringing all the different major institutions and players essentially into this ecosystem altogether. That said, and one of the, obviously, as we have witnessed, impact management or impact investment is growing, doubling, and we hope that post COVID-19, hopefully this will be rallying cry for all of us who want to be doing good in the society to even focus even more on the impact investment. It's been growing, doubling every year, but that's just a small tiny of the bucket. $1 trillion size is a small piece compared to the overall finances that's available out there. And that's why we have businesses or corporates also trying to align. And last year, Business Roundtable also had a rallying cry to really align that towards not only the shareholder value, but the stakeholder value. So Ben, can you talk about why is it essential to avoid the SDG washing? Especially, maybe you can start with the corporate side of it, because they are going to be playing bigger role. Obviously, impact investors are going to play a role, but they're going to mostly play the role as a reference. But a lot of things will come from the businesses who has a much bigger process, where they currently are used to be reporting on ESG base, but is that sufficient? Why should they be, how should be measuring their impact? And how should they be aligning to the SDG?
Well, I think the most important thing here is that we need to act quickly. We have so much to do collectively, not just corporate, but everyone, governments, organizations. The levels of inequality we're seeing around the world are rising. All the graphs show that. And to meet the environmental targets, we have a lot of work to do. Yeah, climate change is getting worse. And we have issues like coronavirus, which shows that sort of global health pandemics are a real risk to society as well. Not to mention the kind of global recession that we're going to work into. So I think it shows that we're, as a race, we're living beyond the limits, and we're stretching and raising all these risks to a high level. So it's really important that we avoid SDG washing, because we need to not go back to business as usual. We need to change the way that we're making decisions. We need to make sure that when we're reporting our social and environmental impact, it is meaningful data that is actually used for decision making, and therefore the level of scrutiny around that needs to be as high as it is around financial accounting, so that we can have confidence in the information around our social and environmental performance, and we can actually use that data to make better decisions. And yeah, I just think at the moment that too much of this reporting is tokenistic, and people are choosing what it is that they're including in there, and without the same level of accountability as they have for financial value.
And Ben, I'm assuming that many of listeners today have are familiar with the Social Value International or even member of Social Value International. But to bring everybody together, can you refresh everyone with the 7 principles of social value, and really what exactly have you been doing with the SDG alignment? Can you give more color to the processes of stakeholder-based value? Can you give more, because I think not everybody's familiar with the 7 principles. So can we start explaining that, and really how does that align with Sustainable Development Goal? And maybe you can also give a little bit landscape in UK, for example, where everybody is with respect to SDG goal alignment and where needs to go, essentially, obviously.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you, Umesh. I don't normally need an invitation to talk about the social value principles, but I'm glad you've given me one. I mean, yeah, the principles of social value are obviously the approach that Social Value International advocates in terms of accounting for value, and it's an accountability framework which makes you as an organization accountable for all of the consequences of your activities. So it's not just looking at your positive intended outcomes and have you achieved your goals. The principles, all 7 of them, are there to create a framework that enables you to collect data about everything. So it's the unintended outcomes that happen, as well as the intended ones, and it's the negative outcomes as well as the positive ones. And this is a framework of principles that have been around for over 10 years now. Here you can see on the screen those 7 principles. The first 5 are really about analyzing and accounting for your impact, and the last 2 about reporting, that sort of transparency and verification. And at the heart of the approach is principle number 1, which is about involving stakeholders. And that means that all stakeholders, all people or groups of people that are affected by your activities. So it's really about amplifying voices and listening to people that often don't get heard, and understanding the value that's being created from their perspective. And well, what is the impact of our activities? Are we creating positive value here, or can we create more positive value in other areas? And really that listening piece so that you can make better decisions is critical. There's some principles in there about really understanding what changes. That's the outcomes and the aspects of well-being that are changing. Then there's understanding the value or the relative importance of those outcomes so that you can make better decisions, and not overclaiming as well. And I won't go into too much detail on these because you know I can talk all day about these, but I did want to flag up that we have produced a paper with Ernst & Young, one of our members in Australia, to really explore how the principles can be used by any organization, a corporate or a non-profit, to get the right information that you need to be accountable for your activities. And then it also talks about how that can then be aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals, and that those SDGs can really come in almost at the end as the icing on the cake. And I was very proud when I found that image of a cake with the SDG icing, but because really the SDGs are just the final layer that should be applied to your impact reporting. So it's flipping it around, rather than an organization starting with the SDGs as the basis for their reporting or impact management. They should start by really being accountable for all actions, all their activities, understanding what that impact is, and then once they have that information, they can see what's material, what's most important, and then that can be mapped to the SDGs, because I think the SDGs provide a nice
Okay, we are seeing some. Sorry, go ahead. there was a little bit congestion when maybe we can repeat last 10 seconds.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that really the SDGs should be the icing on the cake, the final layer of mapping once you've already collected the data. I'm sorry if my Wi-Fi is a little bit slow. Can you hear me now?
No, we can hear you fine. And I think, by the way, I'm sure everybody's feeling the same way. Everybody's moving suddenly on a Zoom, and all the traffic from Netflix and Zoom is hogging up all the internet everywhere in the world. So you're not, it's not unique to you, Ben. Here in San Francisco, we technically a very large bandwidth, we are facing exactly the same issue. So, all right. Anything you want to complete this thought, and maybe we can move on to the next topic. So really, I mean, what are the advice you have the companies who are starting it out, who wants to start on mapping with this 7 principle altogether? And I remember we talked about this particular topic in a social value international conference in Taiwan about the current state of the SDG alignment is still pretty weak, essentially. So what should we be doing, essentially, to aligning towards the SDG? Can you give a little bit more color? I believe the philanthropy are a little bit behind, and even the corporates are also struggling to figure out what is the best way to align all together. So maybe you can give more color to that and see how people should prepare themselves to align with the Sustainable Development Goal.
Well, I think you're right in that some sectors are embracing the SDGs more than others. And I can only really speak for what's happening in the UK. And a colleague of mine, Becca, has done a lot of research to sort of see which sectors are really embracing the SDGs and aligning their reporting to that. And certainly the business and corporate world are probably leading of all the sectors. The civil society organizations, the charities, the non-profits don't tend to report against SDGs. I think it's fair to say that as a sector, they've not as interested in aligning their impacts to the SDGs, and that's interesting. And then the public sector, well, also not particularly advanced in their sort of focus on the SDGs. The UK government have been quite slow to conduct indicators for the public sector as a whole, although there has been a report out in the last year and a voluntary national review. There's a lot of long way to go for example, local authorities to start using the SDGs as a framework. That's just my experience. Is that something that you would sort of see in the States, Umesh? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of very similar thing. A lot of the, I think what we see obviously from nonprofit is that they're purely struggling, obviously. However, there's a very strong interest and alignment on how to align those things. And I think if you look at corporate level, there are different type of questions. Then the philanthropic sector and the impact investment sector altogether. How do you map at the national level? How do you map that the results that I'm producing is really in line with some of my county? And so those are the kind of questions. So we are working with series of accelerators who are trying to solve these issues of taking the census-based data. Census is the approach in US, and mapping it to SDG and really mapping those results to the individual results that align with the Sustainable Development Goal. On the other hand, businesses have much bigger challenges altogether, and I'll talk a little bit more, obviously, later in part of it, where there's a global challenges of how to report this thing, how to communicate it, and how to track it over the period of time altogether. So there's different level of challenges depending on who you are, whether you are business, whether you are investors, or fund foundation or nonprofits. But we hope that maybe if you continue tuning in this session, you will get some of the answers, not all of them, but some of the answers as well. So we try to really untangle this particular web of alignment of SDG altogether. Okay, so with that and out, let's talk about the next topic. What is a good impact management practice to align with SDG? You can give any kind of host of topic from some of the trends to what you see. What are the best impact management practices?
So I think I started to unpick that in the last discussion, really, around good impact management practice is collecting all of the data you need to make decisions about improving your performance, being accountable for all of your activities, not just positive. So that's what good impact management practice is. And that often means starting with the information you need to make, to know whether you are, creating a positive impact, and then aligning sort of secondly. So I think that is how I would approach this. Really focusing on, the purpose of impact management data is to drive decision making rather than just to produce a report that shows a contribution towards something. So there's two purposes of collecting data, and one is about sort of making decisions, and the data for that can be sort of used internally, and that's what good impact management practice is at a sort of organizational level. And then there's sort of information that can then be presented and reported externally. And I think it's important to focus on the former before we focus on the latter. Yeah, I think it's about accountability, and the best practice could be getting buy-in from the top of an organization to kind of acknowledge that impact management is about an accountability framework, about recognizing where your activities are causing harm as well as positive. And once that's in place, I think that sets you off as the right sort of framework and purpose for doing this. The thing about SDGs is, they are designed for a holistic kind of look at performance on a range of different topics, and so taking that sort of holistic approach is key.
Excellent. So now that we have put the perspective of SDG and impact management, the next area, and this is a part of some of the learning, obviously, that I saw last year when we went to GIN, Social Value International Conference, GSG, which is the global conference of the impact investors, and SOCAP. And the constant question that I kept saying is that really how should different players, essentially impact investors, corporate philanthropy, and how can they align with SDG goal and targets and indicators? Maybe you can start, and maybe I can give some colors to that, essentially.
Yeah, well, I'll just kind of probably repeat a few of the things that I've said, really, that I think organizations, whether they're corporates or working in philanthropy, non-profit, need to get the information they need first and foremost about improving decisions, data that helps them know whether they are on track, and that's data about positive impact, but also negative impact, and they need to use the indicators that make sense for them. If those indicators then can be aligned to SDGs, then that's great. But I think SDGs were never really designed for an organization, enterprise level. They were designed at a sort of country level, or they work well at a place level. And we need to be careful when organizations start looking at those indicators, because it probably might not be the information that they need to make the right at the management level. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, Ramesh.
I absolutely agree, and we are seeing the similar struggle from most organizations. They think that they can suddenly start taking SDG goal targets and indicators and start mapping to their thing, and that's not how it's going to work. Yeah, you can easily map to the SDG goal and maybe targets in some cases, in many cases I would say, but the indicators, they are designed to be more reference, essentially. They're designed more at the country level or the county level altogether. But fundamentally, and there are some the mapping being provided by some of the standards that we'll talk about, like IRIS and CDP and Global Compact, have done a pretty phenomenal job in linking those things. Because essentially the organizations, the key performance indicator or the impact metrics needs to be aligned with the national level thing in some shape or form, but it's not, it's an art essentially. And it also requires you to make sure that you're linking it very carefully and very intentionally all together. So you're absolutely right. And other part that I feel that everybody's, especially the impact investors, are struggling is if I'm starting the fund, how do I align that with the certain SDG? Should it be based on the theme, which SDG I should align? And I think there are some activities obviously happening in the space that we should be really be aware of, that there are major chapters started by, similar to Social Value International, there's GHG, is also a network-based organization, and they have created a NAB, National Advisory Board, which is a very country-specific or region-specific thing. And it makes a lot of sense to work with those NABs to make sure that should I be aligning with the gender lens or refugee lens or the job creation lens. And those things are extremely important. And I think one should not be just creating the funds, that's like we see in a grant making world, that this is my passion. It's more about really solving the global problem and issues and shortages. And the chapters like now, National Advisory Board really can help you align the collective impact that you are creating in the region that you're coming out from altogether. So very important that that alignment is really coming out very well through that approach. Ben, you want to add something, please?
Trying to build on that, because right, the opportunity that we have is to align investment along data that we have with SDGs to find the most needs. So to use the data around SDGs to identify the needs. So there's lots of initiatives out there which is bringing together the data about a particular country or location and showing the performance of that area against the SDGs, and the data around that is really useful, because then when an investor is looking to invest in that area, they can see, well, this area is underperforming in terms of SDG 5, 7, and 12, and therefore that's where the most need is, and then they can channel investments into organizations that are orientated towards achieving those goals. So I think that's fantastic, and the more data we have around these SDGs and the sort of thresholds and targets for each SDG in each area, the easier it will become for investors to kind of channel investment appropriately to areas which are underperforming in certain areas. And I think that's all great, but just, with the caveat of my earlier points around organizations can't just focus on the ones that they think are important, but, and they need a mechanism to make sure that they are reporting on all SDGs. But at the risk of repeating myself, let's probably move on.
Well, that's a very important point. I mean, it's very important to be very intentional about how to invest where the biggest need is, because there are so many global needs out there, from the health crisis that we are seeing, from the climate to the job creation. And there are many, the major issues are on the horizon that needs to be thought through. And this needs to be really, everyone needs to come together to solve the most pressing issues and the crisis that we hopefully see coming on our way. So with that, I think the next topic was kind of addressed. What are the issues of aligning with SDG indicators? I hope that answer was there. This is one topic that, again, that is very critical, which is really follow-up to what we are just discussing now. So what are the trends we see, obviously, with the impact reporting from corporate impact investors, SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, and the philanthropic sides, and what are the challenges? So, Ben, you can give your perspective, but I'll give some perspective a bit more where people are facing, because we talk to various different type of organizations, from corporates to impact investors, philanthropy, and we see different type of struggle. So I want to have everybody at least be aware of some of the things that's coming up in the space. One of them is from corporate side. There are two main areas that I would like to pay attention to. One is the approach is emerging. I wouldn't say standards or framework. This is more like an approach. Future Fit has done a phenomenal job to really align. This is mostly aligned essentially in, companies and investors to really globally report. Now, it's not about reporting just like global reporting, GRI or anything like, which are tend to be more free form. One of the challenge and criticism of standards like GRI has always been that people can report whatever they want to, and essentially as a result, it can become big and bulky 400-page reports and very difficult to dissect. What this kind of standards are really saying is that I am a startup or I'm a company and I want to report consistently, let's say on 17 goals, 6 of them I'm doing positive, 5 of them neutral, and remaining I'm doing negative altogether. And it's just a way to transparently share those framework to different stakeholders outside. I mean, as you may have heard last year, many of the corporates have announced that they are going to be carbon neutral by 2030. What does that mean? People need to be really presenting that how they are tracking and progressing towards those goals. And that's where these things sort of come in. There's also another area that I would pay attention to, which is the Global Compact has come up with the SDG Action Manager. Again, keep in mind that these are the approaches which are not the ESG, although they are focused on ESG in the sense of they ask the questions about how to report on environmental, social, and governance aspect of it. But this is just a way to communicate how you're doing it. There are different approaches. One is really telling you, how am I doing? Whereas other one is just telling me, how can I report to this particular global approaches. One area though, however, is that this does not tell you any impact per se. It only tells you, how am I doing altogether? And there are notably 2 major things that I would like to give you. One is the impact management project, which gives you a very common way for both investors, businesses, and enterprises to intentionally report positive, negative reports with a common lens, essentially. And other development, and there are many other things that's happening, especially in impact investment wall, which is really impact IRIS plus based standard, which helps you align your objective with the areas that you may be focusing on. So maybe you're focusing on education, and then you can look for different type of the goals that you may have, and it provides you the very clear reference profile of what kind of reporting that you should be doing. So these things are very useful. In just to be very summarizing them, this SDG impact, SDG action, and they are more for external reporting perspective, whereas this is more from reporting from impact perspective. However, the challenge remains the same in both cases. That how do I collect the data? As you mentioned, Ben, initially, that gathering impact data is very critical. It just tells you that you are this much in this particular goal, but you still have to prove the impact that you are in this particular thing. And so that's where the obviously work like SOPAC comes in, where it can help you aggregate the result. Now, there are 2 ways to do that. If I'm a big business, I can really realign my business systems to capture those details, but that can be very time consuming altogether. Or you can build more data warehouse to really capture those data that you want to track essentially and report to altogether. So that is really a key trends that I see. And Ben, please also add your perspective as well. What are the other trends that you see in this space today?
Yeah, thanks so much. What are the trends? Well, I think, as we've talked about quite a bit already, there's a focus on intentionality, like the goals that, the SDG goals that organizations hope to perform well against or are orientated towards. There's a natural kind of over focus on those, and maybe that is at the expense of reporting on all of them. That's definitely a trend that we've seen. In terms of corporates, then I'm not sure if this is a trend, but it's certainly the case that they will use a materiality lens that focuses on what are the goals that are material, and by that I mean most important to the business. So that's fine and quite normal for corporate reporting, but that does mean that they will choose issues that they think are important to the success of the business rather than issues or outcomes that are important to all people and the planet. So that's an interesting trend that exists. It's not so much a trend. I have seen some interesting work on dual materiality assessments, which is a good trend that I'm going to keep an eye on, because dual materiality means that corporates will be looking at what is material to them as a business, but also what is material and important to other stakeholders, like people in the community and just the global population as well. So there is a useful trend, I think, in more sophisticated sustainability experts thinking we shouldn't just report on what's material to the business from a commercial lens, but actually what's important and material to other stakeholders as well. So I think that's a good trend that I've spotted.
Okay, great. So we are in the 40 minutes, so I'm gonna really wrap with the two questions, and then we can go into the Q&A session. I would really like to encourage everyone to ask any questions to Ben or me, really on any questions you may have about SDG washing, SDG alignment. So this is your opportunity to do that. I see one question, obviously, and we'll get to that essentially in a second. But maybe, Ben, you can take some time because there are only one question so far. So we need to make sure that we complete this particular thought essentially on the SDG alignment. With that, essentially, how to take the actionable steps for the long-term learning. What are your take on this thing? Maybe you can give us some concrete tips to everybody. I know everybody's coming from different background, but maybe you can.
Yeah, I think my first advice is just get started. It can feel quite daunting when it comes to sustainability reporting or impact reporting, impact management, where to begin. It's a journey. It's a phrase I often use. You need to get started. So start somewhere, and you'll get better year on year. That's something everybody says, and the organizations that are doing this well have learned from mistakes. So you need to begin somewhere. I think the first step is to have a conversation at the highest level of your organization to really get clarity on what we mean by impact management, reporting, why are we doing it? And at the heart of that conversation should be around improving the decision making in the organization so that you become a better performing business, not just commercially, but in terms of your performance on people's well-being and your performance or impact on the planet. And if you have that right from the beginning, then the rest of it should flow in a sense that you should do this for the right reasons. You should do this to make yourself more accountable rather than just collecting data to tell the world how great you are. So I think having that conversation, which is quite an honest and frank conversation, is really important. And then my last point, thirdly, is to perhaps seek some external verification of your practice or your reports. And people might see this as a bit of a shameless plug for one of our services, but we believe assurance and accreditation is really important. So even if you're just at the beginning, your journey, having someone else, a third party, to come and have a look at the reports that you have can be useful way to get feedback and learn about how to get better. It's not just about a rubber stamp exercise to kind of prove how good you are, but it's a really helpful thing to kind of have someone else give you advice on where you do align to good practice and where you can improve. So those are my 3 steps.
Okay. And with that, I think we have many questions that we can get to it. But with the last question, which is really from me, which is what role Social Value International and Impact Management Project play? So many of you already introduced some about the 7 principles from Social Value. Maybe you can also give a little bit color to Impact Management Project. I'm assuming many of you have heard of it, but some of them may not. So maybe for that benefit, maybe you can describe how do they help this Sdg Washing.
Yeah, sure. So the Impact Management Project is a project. It's not an organization. It's bringing together the biggest standard setters in this space. So global standard setters like GRI, like IRIS, like BLAB, but also OECD. They set standards for data collection. The UNDP is setting standards as well. GS. So yeah, I won't list them all. But you can check that out on the website, and it's fantastic that there is an initiative that is bringing those people all together around the same table, because there are a few standards out there that there's perhaps offered some confusion to investors or corporates or NGOs about which set of standards to align themselves to. And the opportunity then is to show how they all fit together and align where appropriate. So where there are some standards that are offering virtually the same service, then there's the opportunity to get convergence around those. But there's also a recognition now that there are some standards that are appropriate for different players in the ecosystem. So I think one of the roles of the Impact Management Project is to be very clear about how they all fit together. So, Social Value International's principles and framework for accountable value can work in collaboration with GRI and perhaps in collaboration as well with IRIS as well. And so they are not all mutually exclusive. So I think the role that project is having is showing the alignment between each set of standards and the way that they can fit together, like a jigsaw puzzle, really. A system of standards is how we've been describing it. And the last way that I think the SVI and IMP can help is to really sort of lobby for governments and the regulators to recognize the importance of this and how close we are to unifying a set of standards, so that people don't think that this is impossible, because we are, we've shown that it is possible. And so like institutions like the EU and governments need to, like the G7, need to be able to look and say, right, this is how corporates should report, or this is how all organizations should manage their impact.
Excellent. That's a great closing thing. So anyone who hasn't really been a member, please, I highly recommend that you be part of this movement. This is really a collective movement, and Social Value has been doing that for many years. So very important to join that movement. There are many questions. I know this is, we want to answer all the questions. Some of them are in a QA panel and some of them are in a chat panel. So please hang in there if you want to get your answer to your question. And so we may go a little bit over the hour, but I want to make sure that we do answer some of those questions in a complete fashion altogether. So I think maybe I'll just start with this question I have in my front, which is really about something really related to social value, which is, could you give me some guidance to become a practitioner, please? In my case, I'm not part of the company yet, but I feel I need to learn tools to be more competent and competitive. And this is Alfredo from Mexico. To learn, for instance, GRI and IRIS. Obviously, you can always go to SOPAC website, and we have an immense amount of resources out there, but maybe Ben, you can talk a little bit more about how can they join the Social Value International, and what are the value, because that's the largest network essentially for all the practitioners. So can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, thank you, Ramesh, and thank you, Alfredo, for the question. It's great that more and more people are wanting to become, a practitioner or a professional in this space. It is true that Social Value International is a community for practitioners, and we have a pathway that can guide you through some accreditation. So we have some training, and we have some stages as a practitioner. So there's an associate level, there's a practitioner level, and then an advanced level. And that does really create a pathway for you to learn, understand, and start applying the principles. It also has reference to some of the other frameworks, but that pathway is predominantly around the Social Value International approach. So I can speak to that, but Umesh and the team at SOPAC are very good at also orientating people in these other standards that exist, such as GRI and IRIS and so forth. So yeah, there's lots of opportunity. We can send you through some links for the Social Value International practitioner pathway. That'll be great.
And if I can add a little bit here to that I see a tremendous appetite for learning a lot about the social value and social impact principles. We at SOPAC, we take the field building as a very core part of our mission. As part of our giving back to community, Impact Cloud is not just a platform to streamline the whole process, but also share the best practices from impact strategy to Sdg Washing to how to apply various different type of impact measurement and management best practices. You, at the risk of shameless promotion, you can go to SOPAC, youtube.com/SOPAC, and really look at some of the amazing videos that our team has prepared, and you can really benefit so much from that work that we have been doing as well. So there are lots of resources, and we'll be happy to pass on that back to you. One more question that I'm going to ask, which is really Adriana. She asked, let me go back, there's a lot of questions here. So SDG Action Manager is a very good tool, but funds are having to deal with many deals. It is very difficult to apply. Are the tools you suggest to integrate with SDGs at the due diligence phase, questionnaire, metrics, etc., I can include to make sure that I do not only measure the contribution to SDG, but also really makes sure the SDGs are part of the investment decision? Ben, can I answer this one, or do you want to go?
Oh yeah, no, I think it's perfect for you.
Yeah, so this is something we deal with in every impact investor's decision. Adriana, you're right. I mean, the impact investors are a bit different than philanthropic organizations. They tend to have every portfolio company very different and intentional, and thus SDG alignments and impact metrics can be very unique. The way we see some of the funds who have sometimes 100 or even 300 investments, they really have their own individual theory chain, and they define the core metrics across some of the portfolio of areas, which may be the job creation, renewable energy, and so on. And so that's the approach that we recommend, obviously, and then ultimately aligning those portfolio around SDG goals altogether. It is a convoluted process in terms of how you align that, but we have been doing a lot of work on how to communicate this thing effectively. Obviously, there are two different approaches in this space. One is a theory of change-based approach, which you can beautifully align that with SDG and measure the progress as long as your data practices are very clear. Another approach is, especially in a due diligence process, is for the impact management project. However, I would caution that impact management project is 2-year project. There's a lot that's emerging and they're flushing out a lot of quirks there as well. I would say start out simple. Keep it very simple. Make sure that you have a scoring system for the due diligence things that really answers the questions that your impact team is looking for. And make sure that you go away from the sniff test to the test where you can really see that it meets some of the standards that you establish for some of the core principles of your impact investment and impact thesis both altogether. So I hope that answers your questions, Adriana. I'm happy to discuss that more in details on one-on-one. Here's the next question. Maybe I can ask you because you've been doing a lot of work, Ben, on reporting. So can you provide example of SDGs and impact reporting done well? You even have services around that. So can you tell a little bit more about that, Ben?
Sorry, what was the question, Umesh?
Question was, can you provide examples of SDGs or impact reporting done well?
Sure. We have, I would sort of say, good reports in terms of the SVI framework can be found. We have a library of reports that meet the SVI report assurance standard. So we have a report assurance standard that gets updated once a year, and reports can be assured against that. So we can see some good reports there. In relation to the SDGs, the best thing to look at the moment is something that the UNDP are developing called practice standards for SDG impact. I will share the link with you after this, and that is a sort of one of the spin-offs from the impact management project, where the UNDP are looking at what is the best practice that a corporate can do in terms of reporting at SDGs and having good alignment to the impact management project and Social Value International. So yeah, that's two things that I would
okay
to look at.
I'm gonna move a little bit faster. So the way it's a little bit longer question. So let me read it out. The way in which the funds are being found to raise the raises the question of why this hasn't been done before. The amount of money and government and organizations are borrowing it is very difficult to see how this can be repaid. So this raises the question of what actually is the value of the money. Do we really need money? That sounds like a very philosophical question, but money doesn't solve the problem, it creates them. We could eradicate many of the causes of poverty immediately. I think we all kind of sympathize with this spirit and sentence, obviously. And this is a very tough challenges, and I'm not sure we have enough time to obviously go through that, but thank you for your comments and really question altogether.
I think that,
go ahead, please.
Well, it sounds like the question may be in response to the coronavirus crisis that we're in that sort of governments are printing money or finding money from God knows where to address these solutions. Certainly in the short term, it seems weird how they can find it, and then raises the question in the long term how they get. I don't know the answer to that, but what it does show is that when they need to address a problem, they can do it. And so that begs the question that in normal times, when we're not facing this crisis, why are funds or the political will not being channeled to address that? And it's interesting that the governments don't see climate change as an emergency, and so aren't reacting to that, whereas they are reacting to coronavirus, which is seen as a very immediate threat. So I think it's a really good question. And as you say, Umesh, one that we probably need longer for. But yeah, I think thank you for asking that.
Yeah, this is absolutely something we should all be thinking. It's not an easy question. Now, next question is also very interesting too. This is from Khalid. It says, "Thank you for insightful presentation and discussion. Would we still need to measure impact if more and more companies are purpose-driven and are dealing better and with the triple bottom line?" I can give my perspective here. I mean, and it comes up not just with the companies, even social enterprises and nonprofit. Should we just be intentional? I think intentional is not sufficient, in my opinion. In certain type of work you do, you don't need to be measuring it. I don't say that everything needs to be measured. However, if you want to scale up certain social impact mission, one of the examples that I keep personally, where we started a journey was reducing mother and child mortality issue. And in that whole journey that when we started in 2011 in tribal villages of India, measuring impact and measuring stakeholders' feedback and was extremely critical. And without those stakeholder feedback on a regular basis and learning from that, that entire initiative just could not have scaled. I was so pleased to see that after 7 or 8 years, not only they were able to reduce the maternal and child mortality, but also state government took it and really take it to the heart to solve that issue. So I think I sympathize with the thing that if you are intentional, you don't need it. But at the same time, I think it is very important that if you want to scale the mission, this is a very measurement really gives you good learning opportunity for whatever mission you are focusing on together. Ben, any other thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Ramesh. You know, I wouldn't say just because everyone has a purpose, then we don't need to measure a purpose that is beyond making money, and it's a purpose to improve lives. And you still need to measure your impact to know whether you are achieving that purpose or how you can achieve more of that purpose. So just as Ramesh said, it is absolutely vital that we listen to stakeholders, understand the impact we're having, whatever our purpose is, if we want to improve and maximize the impact we're having.
Okay, the next question is for you, Ben. Would be great to hear from Ben how different segments of corporates, based on their SDG maturity level, should address Sdg washing. How different are there essentially? How are there essentiality of addressing Sdg washing? This question is an QA window, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not sure what essentiality means in this context, but it's true that there's going to be different departments of a corporate that will be doing impact or sustainability reporting to a better or worse degree. And I think it would help if a corporate could, I think getting back to my point around assurance and verification, if they sort of took it seriously and subscribe to some third-party verification, then that would help all of the departments learn to become consistent and reach a standard. That would be my recommendation.
And next question is something that I'm very passionate about, which is there are many resources spent on designing framework and standards in silos. What is the key thing to do in order to accelerate the convergence towards the common framework and language to identify the measure the impact? This is many of you know, I'm very passionate about this topic. We've been obviously in this journey for some time, but fundamentally, many of you may have seen I agree with the sentiment that there are so many standards and framework and tools out there, and it's a high time we do convergence. The good news is last year when I was in those different conferences of JN, GSG, and SOCAP and Social Value International, there was a very common messaging that is coming out from it. And I think there's amazing amount of work has happened in the last couple of years, especially some of the movements from IFC principles to IMP, Impact Management Project, to Social Value International, to GN IRIS Plus, where it's really bringing everything together. And now finally there are the body coming in like SDG Impact Certification and IFC based, which is really telling us one thing, which is really time has come that we have now well-defined profile for the team, and now let's use them in a consistent fashion altogether. Now the framework has come in, there is a time and moment where technology can help the adoption and help this bringing standardization and also conformity. Platform like SOPAC, obviously, Impact Cloud really brings that kind of flexibility to make sure that you ensure and report and learn from the impact on a very continuous basis altogether. So I'm very hopeful where things are going. And I really believe that the next decade is going to be about really simplifying what the measurement and management of the impact is. And I believe that we're going to start to uncover a lot of the answers very soon. So I'm very hopeful in this respect. Ben, you want to add anything to this one, essentially?
No, I think we're getting there. I think we're very close. There's more convergence than ever now. So we can just keep collaborating. SDG number 17, collaboration towards the goals, and we'll get there.
Okay. And we just keep it last question here. Thank you all for tuning in. Last question from Eva Amon. Working with a lot of corporates on sustainability, this is in the chat window, Ben, working with a lot of corporates on sustainability reports and SDG alignment, it's often challenging to convince companies to address their negative impact. Any hints on how to push for more balanced reporting, especially often data is unavailable, held back, or incomplete, and targets are not in place, and management levels are not accessible?
Well, Eva, I think it's good that that's the last question, because I think you hit the nail on the head. You've gone right to the core of the topic of today's conversation, is that a lot of businesses just do not take this seriously. They are choosing to ignore the negative and just focus on the positive because they want to continue business as usual. I'm afraid I don't have an easy answer. I've talked a few times around report assurance and verification, so getting an audit to kind of check that companies are meeting a standard, which does make organizations accountable and responsible for all of their activities. That would be one piece of advice. But really, it's about leadership and the culture of an organization. If they care and want to do the right thing, then they will embrace negative data about their negative impact as well as their positive, because they need to learn from that. I think you could try by sort of showing the business case for performing better socially and environmentally. That's one thing that works for me when I'm working with a business, is to kind of say, look, this isn't just nice to have. The organizations that are performing well on their environmental impact and their social impact are actually performing well commercially. So that is a good argument to get businesses that are perhaps a little bit reluctant to take this seriously into sort of realizing that it's not just a nice to have anymore, it actually makes business sense. I'll leave it there. We're way over time, and I do need to scoot soon with my home responsibilities.
Wrap it up in 30 seconds. So if I can be one last word of advice to this question, is to keep it intentional and keep it simple, and let things uncover by itself. So if you do that, I think things can really evolve very well. If you try to do the big bang, you're gonna fail. So I think if you're intentional and keep it simple, you will succeed altogether. So with that, I thank you so much to Ben for his time. I thank you, all of you, to be participating in this the global question and answer, and really happy SDG alignment. And I hope we all really come through this particular global crisis, and hopefully we'll see a better world after this one. Ben, last.
Thank you, Ramesh. It's been great to join you. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and participation. Last thing to say is let's just all stay safe and speak soon.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.